More newts. Newts everywhere. Newt, newt, newt. It's fantastic. I know a joke about a newt. A man walks into a bar with a newt on his shoulder, and the barman says, "What an odd pet. Have you got a name for him?" He said, "Yeah, he's called Tiny." And the barman said, "Why do you call him that?" "Well, because he's minute." Before I do anything else, I want to start having a bit of a tidy. I've got rocks and cut up bits of felt and offcuts of pond liner everywhere. So we'll have a good tidy up first, and then I'll think about getting some turf to go around the edge. What is this strange stuff falling out of the sky? Wasn't prepared for that. I made some good progress on the turf yesterday, and this is not ideal weather for laying turf. The weather this weekend and up into early next week looks like it's going to get into the high 20s and low 30s. Again, we're desperate for some rain. Had a little shower last night and this morning, but not really very much. So in terms of laying turf in this kind of weather, it's going to have to be watered 2 or 3 times a day, every day, until it's established. But needs must. Now, bit by bit on this job, I've been introducing a few plants in the morning and just putting a few bits and pieces back in rather than planting the whole lot on one go. And this morning, I've just brought with me some lovely Pondateria pickerel weed. Looking very, very lush, just beginning to come into flower. Anybody watching any of my videos will know I always rave about this being one of my favourite plants. I love the very lush, almost sort of tropical looking foliage. It's quite striking in the pond, and I love the fact that it's a very, very late flowering plant. A lot of pond plants tend to be over quite early in the season and look a bit straggly and untidy, whilst the pickerels are really just starting to pick up now, and then they'll start looking their best and continue to do so right the way through until about October time. So we'll get some of these in the pond. Morning, Barney. Come on then. Good boy. Greets me every morning. Lovely welcome. Barney, you're squishing my pickerel weed. Off. Come on. Good boy. Silly Billy. I love the simplicity and the natural way of planting directly into gravel like this. I had planned on draining the pond down to do the planting, but doing it bit by bit like this, it meant it hasn't really stirred up the pond and made it dirty. Beautiful. Last of the turf down, and only one roll left over. Excellent stuff. Now initially, this all looks very artificial. It reminds me a little bit of Teletubby land. But it will grow very quickly. Some of the clover and the weeds from the old lawn are going to mix with this, and it will start to look a little bit more natural and blend in. It's going to have to be watered morning, noon and night at the moment. It's so dry. And there may be a little bit of drying where it's immediately over the stonework. There's lots of little wet spots around here where it will grow, and it will very quickly green up again. So now I've got an awful lot of tidying up to do. Last day of the job today. Typically, and if you watch any of my videos, you'll know I always moan about this, but at the end of the job, it always seems to rain for me. Today is not the case. Today is the hottest day of the year so far, forecast to be 31 degrees. And as we all know in the UK, 30 degrees feels about 50 everywhere else, and the humidity is very wet. So I'm going to relish the fact that I can actually get in the pond and cool off a little bit. Now, the last couple of jobs I've got to do are to introduce some water lilies into the pond, which I've already potted on, cleaned off, and they're just going to get dropped in. And then there's a little clump of lily that's floated to the surface here, which doesn't appear to be anchored at all. So I'm going to get that out of the pond, chop it up into a couple of sections and get that potted on. There's a bit of blanket weed here I'd like to remove, a little bit of duckweed I'd like to skim off the surface, and a lot of the dust from the gravel and just the stonework. And because we've not had any rain and it's very dry, there's quite a biofilm that's developed on the surface here. So a bit of surface spray with a hose is going to agitate that and break it up. And then it'll be job done. Ah, look at that. Just as I'm getting in the pond, I just noticed the exoskeleton of a dragonfly already using the plants that we planted last week to climb out on and emerge. Fantastic. So that is now probably one of these dragonflies that's flying around the pond at the moment. Don't know if the camera is going to pick it up from over there, but there's 2 or 3 dragonflies flying around on top of this pond at the moment. It's a fantastic sight. The way they move always amazes me. Oh, this is the first time I've been in here. Oh, lovely and cool though. Now, as explained to my clients, blanket weed and algae generally is probably going to be a bit more of an issue than it normally would be for the remainder of this year. There's been, a fair amount of disturbance to the pond, a lot more tap water added than would normally be used. The addition of the gravel and the stone and the cement is all going to alter the water chemistry, buffering the water, making it a little bit more alkaline. I'm already pulling out tons of newts with that. So that can sit on the side. So it's going to take the remainder of this season to really settle down. But it's a cosmetic issue rather than anything to be worried about. Now we're going to leave the blanket weed beside the pond here, let it dry out and let the dragonfly larvae and beetles and newts and bits and pieces work their way back into the pond. But it's very important that you don't leave it beside the pond for too long, because once it starts to decompose, the first bit of rain, you're going to get all those nutrients washed back into the pond, and that's going to then encourage further algae to grow, and so the cycle will continue. So let it sit here for a couple of days and then move it well away from the pond edge. And as expected, this bit of lily is just floating. So we'll get that in a basket, get it down to the bottom of the pond, and it will grow properly as it should. Right, that's the worst of the blanket weed out. I'll swap over to a finer skimming net and get rid of some of this duckweed, and then we can get the lilies introduced. And just those few scoops of the net, teeming with life. Beautiful dragonfly larvae. Some lovely little newts, probably a female smooth. Again, another dragonfly larvae. They're quite fierce looking things. They'll spend most of their life like this in their larval stage, 2 or 3 years in the pond, and then they'll climb out of the water, cling onto something emerging above the surface, and they'll break through their exoskeleton to become the mature adult. Sadly, their life as an adult isn't very long, generally 1 summer. Some can live a bit longer. Little water boatmen, back swimmers. These guys can fly, they'll come and go from the pond. Funny looking things. Be careful with those. If you're handling them without gloves, they can give you a little nip. Lots of pond skaters hopping about. Again, they can fly. Oh, so many dragonfly larvae. Something quite relaxing about skimming a pond. I imagine it's quite similar to one of those Japanese or Chinese Zen gardens where people are raking over their gravel and creating interesting patterns. Gives you an opportunity to sort of spend a bit of time looking at the pond, seeing what's going on, what's growing and developing. That lovely soft sound as the net passes through the water. It reminds me very much of when I spend a bit of time paddleboarding or kayaking on a river, and you can hear the water as the paddle is just gently sort of carving through the water. Duckweed is a bit of a pain because it does grow very, very rapidly. If you're not familiar with it, it's a little leaf that floats on the surface with a small taproot that hangs down. It multiplies incredibly quickly, each leaf doubling and tripling in size, very quickly able to cover the surface of the pond entirely and blocking out sunlight to everything else. A certain amount of it can be beneficial in a pond because it grows so rapidly, it uses up nutrients, outcompeting other algae, and the shade it provides can also help to discourage algae and provide a bit of shelter for wildlife. But when it gets to the stage where it's taken over the whole surface of the pond, that kind of monoculture isn't good for anything, and it'll block out sunlight and outcompete everything else. So you want to keep it under control, and unfortunately there's not really any kind of treatment that's effective at controlling it. It's very, very frost hardy. It'll tolerate temperatures down to about -20, and in the winter months it will send down little buds called turions that settle down at the sediment at the bottom of the pond, only to float back up to the surface and start off their cycle again the following season. Birds will introduce it into the pond. It's very easy to introduce bits of it on plants, so you'll never get rid of it completely. But a bit of manual removal, manual control like this periodically, just to keep on top of it, is always a good idea. And the best piece of equipment for that, for an average pond, is a good quality, sturdy, extendable aluminium net like this one. This is a swimming pool handle, and then you get interchangeable heads. Here again we're using a very, very fine sieve net or a pan net, which is ideal for just working the surface really quickly, picking up all the finer particles and then flicking it off. And upon this sort of size you can work your way around it in about half an hour. Right, let's get this water lily potted on. There's a lot of old growth on here that we're not going to want, and that's where it's been floating around on the surface for such a long time that it's had too much exposure to the sun, too much exposure to frosts in winter, and so a lot of that rhizome has started to die off. And this is a good reason why you need to make sure that your water lilies are well anchored and kept down at the bottom of the pond. They don't want to be up floating at the surface. So I'm just using a good sturdy plastic typical pond basket. No aquatic compost. And for all you people that watch my videos, apologies for repeating myself, but gravel is an absolutely fine aggregate material into which you can plant most marginal plants, particularly water lilies, without the use of any aquatic compost. All the nutrients they absorb through the water. You can give them an annual fertiliser spike, which can be quite useful, but otherwise they'll do very happily just in a fine horticultural grit or a 10mm gravel that's washed before you put it in the pond. And the benefit of using the gravel is that it's heavy. It acts as a nice ballast, helping to prevent the pot from becoming buoyant as the rhizome and the foliage start to really establish and grow. A lot of that growth can start to lift baskets that are only held in place with a bit of soil. So gravel's going to help to keep that down. Don't want to plant these too deep. On the rhizome, where you've got the new shoots of the water lily growing through, that's called the eye. You want to keep that bit just at the surface of the pot. too deep, and the plant's going to struggle to grow through the gravel, and the rhizome will end up rotting. I'll top this up with a bit more gravel, and then I'll very carefully lift the plants so that they're sitting at the surface. Now, if you're doing this in fish ponds, you're probably going to have to sprinkle over a slightly coarser grit on top, a 20mm gravel or some small round cobbles, just to help stop your fish from getting into the basket and rummaging around in here. If you've got koi or bigger fish, then even a 20mm gravel or a small cobble isn't going to be sufficient. And you can't go putting on great big Scotch cobbles over the top of this, because that's going to stop the plant from growing entirely. So instead you're going to have to put some sort of mesh over the basket to allow the lily pads to grow through, but prevent the fish from being able to get down into the basket. Typically you wouldn't really have any plants in a koi pond anyway, but big robust varieties of lily will tolerate the disturbances that koi and carp will put on the plants, as long as you can get them established and as long as you can get them covered over. Right, that'll do. Give that a bit of a rinse, and then they can go into the pond. Right, well, that's it. I'm going to sign this pond over to my client. Job done. A little bit of tidying up to do, but otherwise there's nothing else really I can do other than let the pond establish and have the benefit of a little bit of time on its side. I'd like the pot back 2 or 3 weeks' time. The water lilies I've introduced will have pads up at the surface, and it'd be nice to see where the levels of the pond want to sit naturally. The irises and the other plants that I've introduced that I've cut down will very quickly send up some leaf and green up, so the pond will start to look more established very quickly. But it won't be till next year and the following season before the pond really starts to come into its own and the plants get a good chance to establish. And in the meantime, I shall enjoy coming back to see how it's developing and how it does. So overall, what started off as already a nice pond, I think has been elevated just by improving the edging. It's always the edging that I think will make a pond into a great feature, and if you can get the edging right, then everything else will follow suit. Well, I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next pond. Cheers.